the theory of capitalism is in a way a very optimistic theory. And it's an optimistic theory because it basically assumes that progress happens, and progress happens automatically. And that's because of competition. Because you have good firms with good strategies and good products and good practices, and you have, well, firms with not so good practices, and they have to compete, and the ones with the good practices will thrive and survive, and the firms with bad practices will diminish and decrease, and fortunately with them the bad practices will disappear. So progress in the world of business is assured. This basic belief is shared by many business people, by many politicians, by many economists. For example, I have here, this is the famous economist Douglas North. And Douglas North, Nobel Prize winning economist Douglas North, who unfortunately died about a year ago, says about this theory, well, the implications of this theory are that over time inefficient institutions are weeded out, efficient ones survive, and thus there is a gradual evolution of more efficient forms of economic, political, and social organization. The problem is, I don't believe him. And frankly, I never have. And that's because if I look out there in the world of business, it just seems that there are quite a few firms and industries where there are practices that just look pretty stupid, but that do not disappear automatically. Now, I'm not here going to stand here and disagree with the Nobel Prize winner. That wouldn't be very good for my credibility, I realize. But let me say this. I think he's almost right. And I think he's almost right, but he misses a piece. It's a small piece, but it's a significant piece and with potentially big consequences. A couple of years ago, I took several months out to read up on the literature on cultural anthropology. And the reason why I want to read up on cultural anthropology, although I'm a professor at a business school, is because I realized that the field of cultural anthropology has in a way dealt with the exact same problem 2 decades ago, but sort of solved it. Because cultural anthropology always assumed that sort of progress happens. You have tribes with sort of good rituals and good practices. You have tribes with pretty harmful rituals. Well, they will have to compete, and in the process, the tribes with the harmful rituals will diminish, and the harmful rituals will disappear with them. Progress happens. But then after a while, and after lots of research, the cultural anthropologists sort of had to admit there are a lot of cultural practices out there which are basically anomalies. Cultural practices, I'm sorry, they're just stupid, but they do persist. Think, for example, indeed, of female circumcision. There's no way in which this is a good practice. Think of foot binding in ancient China, where young girls would basically get crippled. You had certain tattooing practices in Polynesia where the person receiving the tattoo would often get infected and die and so on. And the cultural anthropologists had to admit, it seems that harmful rituals and practices do not always die out. And eventually they figured it out. And one important ritual that helped them figure out was a ritual among the Fore people in Papua New Guinea. The Fore people, by the way, in Papua New Guinea are, and well, certainly were, a very large tribe. So they existed of multiple villages. And the Fore people had a very particular ritual originally around deceased relatives. Namely, they would bury them, like many other societies do as well. However, at some point, in one of the villages of the Fore people, a new ritual emerged. Instead of burying deceased relatives, they would actually eat them. Initially, this just happened in one of the villages. But strange as it may sound, this ritual became very popular and started spreading to all sorts of villages. I remember trying to read up of why this ritual emerged, and I distinctly remember an eminent cultural anthropologist writing, it seemed that it appeared for purely gastronomical reasons. Which basically meant they weren't so hungry anymore. And frankly, famine was a big problem among the Fore people, so in a way it solved a tricky problem. Now, as said, this practice started spreading and gained in popularity until basically all of the villages of the Fore people consumed their deceased relatives rather than bury them. Unfortunately, this new habit also had some severe negative consequences. And the severe negative consequences basically were that after a number of years, a mysterious disease emerged. A disease they referred to as kuru, and which we nowadays know was actually a variant of Creutzfeldt-Jakob, or mad cow disease. And the Fore people started getting ill by the dozens, by the hundreds, by the thousands. Hundreds of people started dying, thousands of them, until more than half of this very large tribe had been wiped out by this disease alone. But stop the ritual, they did not. In fact, the only reason why it ended is because in the 1950s, Australian forces put an end to it. And by the way, this was not because the Australians understood that this new ritual led to the harmful disease. Well, they just thought it was gross, basically. Let me come back to that example of the Fore people in a minute. But let me first give you a business example, and hopefully you will see the parallels. And the business example that I want to give you is a research project of mine that I did with a colleague called Mihaela Stan. And we did research on the in vitro fertilization, IVF, industry in the UK. And IVF is big business, as you can understand, and most clinics are private clinics. At the inception of this industry, the British government, in all its wisdom, decided that clinics had to publish their success rate. They did this for reasons of transparency in the market and consumer choice and all these wonderful things. Unfortunately, and that's one reason why we studied it, what is a success in this industry is pretty objective. There's no debate of whether the procedure resulted in a success. You can sort of see it after a couple of months. And therefore, the success rate is simply the percentage of live births that results from the treatment. However, what the British government had not anticipated is that the success rate of a clinic does not only depend on how good the clinic is, it also depends on who comes through the door. You could say the quality of the input. Put simpler, some women are easier to get pregnant than others. And what initially a handful of clinics, but later more and more clinics started doing, is select their patients. If, say, a 47-year-old woman with one ovary knocked on the door and said, gosh, we've been trying for 5 years or something like that, this clinic would think, oh gosh, she's going to mess up our success rate. And they would find ways of refusing this patient. They usually wouldn't say go away, but they would say something like, oh, we happen to have a very long wait list. Or a different clinic is more specialized in your condition, or something like that. If, by contrast, a 23-year-old would show up in perfect health and say, oh gosh, me and my boyfriend, we've been trying for 3 months. Sex? No, we haven't tried that yet. Then we'd say, come on in. Now, anyway, what Mihaela and I did was the following. For every single clinic, over their entire existence, for every single year, we looked up their success rate. That was easy because that was publicly available. But then we also looked up the percentage of difficult patients that they treated. And we found the following. We found that those clinics that treat relatively a lot of 47-year-olds with one ovary, bottom one, have relatively low success rates. The clinics that have a low proportion of difficult patients and basically only treat 23-year-olds in perfect health have a higher success rate. Duh. That's a perfect example of perfectly useless academic research. If, however, we did not do another slightly more clever thing, if you don't mind me saying. Because here on the horizontal axis, we measured yet another variable. we measured for each of the clinics the cumulative experience that they had. So basically, how many cases have they treated over their lifetime? And we did that because we wanted to estimate something we call the learning curve. And that basically says all organizations become better with experience. And we found the following. We found that those clinics that treat only easy patients, the dotted line, they improve a little bit over time, but not much. The clinics that also treat a lot of difficult patients actually improve much more quickly over time. In fact, they improve so much quicker over time that after about a year or so, they would overtake the clinics that treat only easy patients. And after, say, 6, 7 years, they had significantly higher success rates than the clinics that only treated 23-year-olds in perfect health, despite having a lot of difficult patients on the books. And that's because those clinics that thought they were being clever by treating only easy patients were basically shooting themselves in the foot. They were depriving themselves of valuable opportunities for learning. Did they stop the practice? No, they did not. Think of the Fore people. Why do these clinics, and why did the Fore people, adopt the practice in the first place? Well, short-term benefits. They weren't so hungry anymore, or they had an immediate jump in their success rate. Why did they not stop? Could they not see the harmful effects? Oh yes, that wasn't the problem. They could sense the harmful effects. The Fore people were dying by the thousands. The clinics can say, gosh, our success rate is lagging behind. But what they could not do is understand the relation between cause and effect. Saying, we're in trouble because 10 years ago we started this new practice. And 3, very importantly, in the meantime, the practice spreads. It's something that's very easy to imitate. Eating your deceased relatives, well, it's reasonably easy to imitate. But also the practice of selecting your patients is very easy to imitate. It is based on observable characteristics, some standard tests, plus doctors talk to each other at conferences, they read journals. The practice spreads quicker than it kills. Those are the 3 consequences, the 3 conditions under which harmful management practices, unfortunately, do not die out. They have some sort of association with success. For instance, genuine short-term benefits, or for instance, because it happened to work in the past. There's causal ambiguity. It's difficult to understand what's leading to the problems. And third, very important, the practice spreads quicker than it kills. That's why I refer to these as corporate viruses. Because in a way, the reason why harmful management practices do not die automatically is the same reason why harmful viruses do not disappear in nature. The HIV virus does not die out in nature, although it basically lowers the life expectancy of its hosts. And that's because it spreads quicker than it kills. And that's exactly what harmful management practices do. The good news is, this genuinely also opens up wonderful new opportunities for innovation in the world of business. Usually when we talk about innovations, we think about Tesla and Uber and Facebook and Google, companies that come up with wonderful new things, often aided by a new technology. And those are sources of wonderful new innovation, absolutely. But most industries are actually pretty homogeneous and pretty stable over time. For those type of firms and in those type of industries, what is a much more plausible and realistic form of innovation is to simply stop doing things that don't work, or at least don't anymore. Here is simply innovation is stop doing stupid things. Again, that's not the only source of innovation, but stopping to do things that no longer work is a source of renewal. So saying, identify and eradicate the things that don't work anymore and reset simply how you organize firms and how you organize strategies. That is a source of innovation. That can increase the wealth of companies and of our societies as a whole.